Daniel Hargrove woke before the house did. That was how he preferred it. Before the staff arrived. Before emails began stacking up. Before the city below the hills fully exhaled into motion. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low mechanical hum that never quite stopped. Climate control. Security systems. A house designed to function even when its owner felt hollow. At 52, Daniel had learned that wealth did not buy rest. It only bought better silence. He swung his legs out of bed and stood, barefoot on cold stone. The floor-to-ceiling windows in his bedroom overlooked San Mateo, the city lights dimming as dawn crept in. Somewhere down there were thousands of people beginning their day with purpose. Or fear. Or hope. Daniel felt none of those. Just habit. He dressed simply. No suit yet. No tie. Just pressed slacks and a sweater he'd owned longer than most of his assistants. He moved through the house alone, footsteps echoing softly in hallways that were wider than necessary. The Hargrove estate had been featured in magazines. Architectural Digest. Business profiles. A fortress of success, one article had called it. Daniel had laughed when he read that. Fortresses were built to keep things out. This house mostly kept things in. He descended the main staircase slowly, fingers brushing the marble banister. Every detail had been chosen carefully. The stone imported. The lighting calibrated to mimic natural dawn. Even the silence was curated. And yet something felt off. He paused midway down the stairs. The house was too quiet. Not the usual quiet. Not the controlled hush of expensive insulation and thick glass. This was a deeper stillness, like a held breath. Daniel frowned, listening harder. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was memory. A thin sound. Almost imagined. A single sustained note, trembling slightly at the edges. It drifted upward through the open space of the house, curling around the staircase like smoke. Daniel's heart skipped. A violin. He stood frozen, one hand gripping the banister now. The sound wavered, then steadied. A melody began to form. Simple. Unassuming. No dramatic rise, no flourish meant to impress. It wasn't polished. That was what unsettled him. It sounded careful. As if whoever was playing it was afraid of being heard. Daniel swallowed. The rational part of his mind kicked in immediately. Staff sometimes listened to music while working. Someone could be playing a recording on their phone. The acoustics of the house could be distorting it. Still he didn't move. The melody repeated, slightly altered the second time. A faint hesitation before the phrase continued. His chest tightened. He told himself not to be ridiculous. And yet, something inside him had already begun to unravel. He took a step down. Then another. Each movement felt deliberate, as if he were approaching something fragile. The sound grew clearer as he descended, guiding him toward the back of the house. Toward the kitchen. As he walked, memories surfaced uninvited. A different house. A narrow porch. Cold air biting at his fingers as he scribbled notes in a worn notebook. A girl sitting beside him, violin tucked under her chin, eyes closed as she played. Daniel stopped walking. He shook his head once, sharply, as if that could dislodge the thought. That was decades ago, he told himself. Another life. Another version of him. The melody drifted again, filling the silence between his thoughts. It was wrong. It was impossible. And yet his body reacted before his mind could catch up. His pulse quickened. His throat felt tight. He became acutely aware of the sound of his own breathing. He reached the hallway outside the kitchen and stopped just short of the doorway. The music was unmistakable now. The phrasing. The pacing. That slight pause before the second repetition. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist. No one knew that song. No one was supposed to. The melody faltered, just slightly, as if the person playing sensed something. Daniel held his breath. For a brief moment, the music threatened to stop altogether. Then it continued. Daniel took one more step forward. And whatever waited on the other side of that doorway was about to collapse the careful distance he had spent a lifetime building. Before we go any further into that moment, take a second. If stories that pull you into quiet, human moments like this speak to you, this is the kind of journey you'll want to keep coming back for. Make yourself comfortable here. Daniel reached the threshold of the kitchen. The sound was so close now he could almost feel it vibrating in his ribs. He looked up and saw the figure standing alone by the counter, Violin resting against her shoulder. The bow moved slowly, deliberately, as if she were finishing something that had been left unfinished a very long time ago. And in that instant, Daniel realized the past had not stayed buried. It had learned how to play. Daniel did not move. He stood just outside the kitchen doorway, half hidden by the wall, listening as if the slightest shift of his weight might shatter the sound. The violin filled the space in a way nothing else ever had. Not the sound system. Not the echo of voices during formal dinners. This was smaller, more fragile, more dangerous. The melody rose, then softened. It carried a restraint that unsettled him. Whoever was playing wasn't performing. They weren't trying to impress. They were remembering. Daniel leaned his shoulder lightly against the wall, suddenly aware of how fast his heart was beating. The logical explanations lined up neatly in his mind like soldiers waiting for orders. It's coincidence. It's similar, not the same. You're projecting. But logic had never been very good at handling grief. The bow scraped faintly as the player adjusted their grip. The sound wasn't perfect. There were micro mistakes. Tiny hesitations. The kind only someone emotionally attached to a piece would make. Daniel closed his eyes. Spokane. A foster house that smelled like boiled cabbage and old carpet. A cracked wooden step out back where he used to sit with a notebook balanced on his knee. He could see it with unbearable clarity. You keep stopping there, the girl had said without opening her eyes. Like you don't trust what comes next. He had laughed, embarrassed. It's not finished. She had tilted her head, listening to the empty space where the melody broke off. Then she had lifted her violin and filled it in, not confidently, not permanently, but intuitively. That's how it wants to breathe, she'd said. Daniel's jaw tightened. The violin in the kitchen reached that same point now. The pause. Not silence. Just hesitation. A breath held too long. Daniel's foot slipped forward an inch on the polished floor before he caught himself. The faint sound echoed. The violin faltered. Just for a second. Then it resumed, slightly softer. Daniel's stomach dropped. Whoever was playing had heard something. They knew they weren't alone now. He opened his eyes and looked fully into the kitchen. Grace Turner stood near the counter, her back half turned toward him. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. She wore her usual uniform. Plain. Practical. Sleeves rolled just past her wrists. The violin rested against her shoulder as naturally as if it belonged there. Daniel had seen her dozens of times since she started working at the house. She was efficient. Quiet. The kind of person people looked past without meaning to. He realized now how little he had truly noticed her. Her eyes were closed. She played like someone alone. The melody repeated again, steadier this time, but Daniel could sense the tension beneath it. Her bow hand was controlled, almost too controlled, like she was holding something back. A memory surfaced uninvited. The scar. Daniel's gaze dropped to her left hand. There it was. A thin, pale line along her thumb. Exactly where a cheap violin string would snap if pulled too hard. His breath caught. No, he whispered, though no one heard him. Grace shifted her weight slightly. The floor creaked under her foot. She opened her eyes. Their gazes met. For a fraction of a second, neither of them moved. The violin let out a soft, unintended whine as the bow stilled midstring. Grace's eyes widened, not in surprise but in recognition. A recognition she tried and failed to hide. Then she straightened, lowering the violin with care. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. Her voice was steady but her hands were not. I didn't realize anyone was awake. I shouldn't have. Where did you learn that song? Daniel asked. The words came out sharper than he intended. Grace froze. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. The light harsher. She glanced toward the doorway behind him as if calculating the distance. It's just something I play sometimes, she said. I didn't know it was. That melody, Daniel said, taking a step closer despite himself. Where did you learn it? Silence stretched between them. Grace swallowed. Her jaw tightened. She looked down at the violin instead of at him. A long time ago, she said. From someone who didn't finish it. Daniel's chest constricted. What was his name? He asked quietly. Her fingers curled around the neck of the violin, knuckles whitening. I don't think that matters anymore, she replied. Daniel studied her face. The careful neutrality. The guarded posture. The way her shoulders curved inward like she was bracing for impact. A name rose to his lips before he could stop it. Lena. Grace flinched. It was subtle. Almost imperceptible. But it was real. The violin slipped slightly in her grasp. She steadied it, then slowly lifted her gaze to meet his. No one's called me that in a very long time, she said. Daniel felt the room tilt. I thought you were dead, he whispered. Grace exhaled, a long, quiet breath that carried years of restraint with it. So did everyone else. And in that moment, Daniel understood this was not a coincidence. It was a collision. And neither of them was ready for what came next. Daniel did not know how long they stood there. Seconds stretched strangely when the past collided with the present. The kitchen, with its spotless counters and quiet hum of appliances, felt unreal now, like a stage set that had been built around a memory. Grace was the first to move. She lowered the violin completely and set it gently on the counter, as if afraid it might break if handled too roughly. The bow followed, placed parallel to the instrument with care that bordered on reverence. Only then did she straighten her back. I shouldn't have played, she said. I usually don't. Not here. Daniel heard the words, but they didn't fully land. His mind was still chasing the sound of the melody, replaying it, testing it from every angle as if there were still a chance it wasn't real. You played it exactly the same, he said slowly. Even the mistakes. Grace's mouth tightened. Some things stay with you. He nodded once, though his thoughts were spiraling. He had built his life on forward motion. On momentum. On never lingering too long in places that could pull him backward. And yet here he was, standing barefoot in his kitchen, heart pounding like a teenager's. Why didn't you say anything? He asked. Grace looked at him, truly looked at him now. Her gaze flicked briefly to the windows, the expansive view, the unmistakable signs of a life that had turned out very differently from hers. Say what? She asked. Hello? It's me? Remember that girl you loved when you were young and broke and thought the world might still be kind? Daniel winced. I didn't know it was you, he said. Your name is Grace now, she interrupted quietly. And it has been for a long time. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Daniel became acutely aware of how inappropriate the setting felt for this conversation. The kitchen. The uniforms. The imbalance of power that suddenly sat between them like an uninvited guest. He took a step back. I didn't mean to corner you, he said. If you want to stop. No, Grace said, surprising him. If we stop now, we'll just pretend it didn't happen. And I'm tired of pretending. She gestured toward the small breakfast nook by the window. We should sit. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He poured 2 cups of tea, hands steadier now that his mind had something practical to focus on. They sat across from each other at the small table, close enough that he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. Time had touched her gently, carefully, as if unsure how much it was allowed to take. You look, he stopped himself, different. Grace let out a soft, humorless laugh. That's one word for it. I searched for you, he said. The words came out before he could weigh them. After you left. I went back to Spokane. More than once. She studied him over the rim of her cup. And then I stopped, he admitted. Her gaze dropped. She nodded as if that answer confirmed something she had already known. I figured, she said. People always stop eventually. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. You disappeared. No note. No goodbye. Grace's fingers tightened around her mug. If I'd said goodbye, I wouldn't have left. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if you know yourself, she replied. I was 17. Angry. Afraid. And already tired of being passed from place to place like something temporary. I didn't want to ask for permission to survive. Daniel absorbed that quietly. I thought you were dead, he said again, the words heavier now. That's what the file said. Missing. Presumed deceased after a few years. Grace's lips pressed together. It was easier that way. For who? For everyone, she said. No one feels responsible for a ghost. Daniel sat back, a chill settling into his chest. He had spent years believing his loss had been clean, final, painful but sealed. He was realizing now that it had simply been deferred. You never told me why you left, he said. Grace looked past him toward the garden outside, where early sunlight brushed the leaves. There are things, she said slowly, that change the direction of your life whether you're ready or not. Daniel's breath caught. Something in her tone, measured, cautious, set off an alarm he couldn't quite name. What things? He asked. Grace turned back to him. Her expression was unreadable. Not yet, she said. You're not ready to hear that part. The words lingered between them, heavy with implication. Daniel felt it then. The unmistakable sense that the story he thought he knew was only the surface. That the melody he'd recognized was just the beginning. And whatever Grace was holding back was about to change everything he thought he understood about his past. The rest of the morning passed in a strange, suspended way. Daniel tried to return to his routine. Emails. Calls. A short meeting with his chief operations officer in the glass-walled office overlooking the hills. He nodded in the right places, asked the right questions, even cracked a mild joke that earned polite laughter. But his attention kept slipping. Every few minutes, his mind drifted back to the kitchen. To the way Grace's hands had trembled when she set the violin down. To the way she'd said not yet like a warning instead of a refusal. By noon he gave up pretending. He dismissed his assistant early and walked the grounds alone, hands in his pockets, gravel crunching under his shoes. The estate was beautiful in a controlled, distant way. Sculpted hedges. A reflecting pool that mirrored the sky too perfectly. He had built this place piece by piece, brick by brick, decision by decision. And yet it suddenly felt like a house he was borrowing from someone else. When he returned inside, the housekeeper-supervisor informed him Grace had taken the afternoon off. He nodded, pretending not to care, even as something inside him tightened. That evening, as the light softened and shadows stretched long across the floors, Daniel made a decision he'd avoided all day. He asked Grace to meet him. Not in his office. Not in the formal dining room where deals were made and power sat comfortably at the head of the table. In the breakfast nook. When Grace arrived, she looked different. She had changed out of her uniform. Simple jeans. A soft gray sweater. Her hair pulled back loosely instead of pinned tight. She still carried herself carefully, but there was less of the practiced invisibility about her. Daniel stood when she entered. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded once. "You said you wanted to talk." "Yes," he replied. "But if you don't." "I do," she said. "I just need to know this isn't going to turn into something else." He understood what she meant. Pity. Nostalgia. Charity disguised as concern. "It won't," he said. "I promise." She studied him for a long moment, then sat. For a while neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward exactly. It was loaded. Like the pause before a storm breaks. "You said you searched for me," Grace said finally. I did, Daniel replied. Not well enough, not long enough, but I did. That's not the same thing, she said gently. No, he agreed. It isn't. She leaned back slightly, arms crossed loosely over her chest. I saw your name once, years ago, in an article. Something about a company acquisition. Big numbers. Big smile. Daniel exhaled. I was 24. I thought if I moved fast enough, I wouldn't feel the absence. Did it work? He shook his head. No. It just got louder when everything went quiet. Grace smiled faintly at that. Not amused. Just understanding. You were always good at running forward, she said. Even back then. And you were good at disappearing, he replied before he could stop himself. Her expression tightened, but she didn't argue. That's how I survived, she said. People don't notice what doesn't demand space. Daniel looked at her hands. The scar on her thumb. The faint calluses. Evidence of a life that hadn't unfolded gently. You kept the violin, he said. Grace glanced toward the counter, where the instrument now rested in its case. I almost didn't. But you did. She nodded. It was the only thing that felt like mine. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing against his ribs all day. Why this house? He asked. Why here? Grace met his gaze. I didn't know it was yours at first. But you stayed. Yes. Why? She was quiet for a long moment. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching. Because I needed the work, she said. And because part of me thought, if I ever heard that melody again I'd know. Know what? That the past doesn't stay buried, she said. It waits. Daniel felt a chill ripple through him. You said earlier, he said carefully, that there were things I wasn't ready to hear. Grace nodded slowly. I didn't leave Spokane because I wanted to, she said. I left because staying would have broken me. Daniel leaned forward. Grace. There are consequences, she continued, her voice steady but tight. To leaving. And to staying. And to loving someone when you don't have a safety net. His breath caught at the last word. Loving. She hadn't said it lightly. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He realized suddenly that whatever came next would redraw the map of his life. There was no version of this conversation where he walked away unchanged. Grace looked at him, eyes steady now. If we keep going, she said, you don't get to pretend anymore. Daniel nodded once. Neither do you, he replied. Outside, the light faded completely, leaving the room wrapped in shadow and anticipation. And somewhere between them, a truth waited, heavy, patient, and ready to be named. Daniel barely slept that night. He lay in the vast bedroom of the Hargrove estate, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house that had never truly been silent. Every creak, every distant shift of the security system, seemed magnified. His mind was alive with fragments. Grace's eyes, the melody of the violin, the weight in her voice when she said the past doesn't stay buried. He turned onto his side, facing the window. The city lights glimmered like a scattered constellation below. He had seen it 1,000 times from up here, yet tonight it felt foreign, like the world he had built was suddenly something borrowed, not earned. Morning came slowly, filtered through fog and filtered sunlight. Daniel rose automatically, pulled on his sweater, and descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. He moved toward the kitchen, a mixture of curiosity and dread tightening in his chest. The room was empty. Grace's violin lay in its case on the counter, but she was nowhere in sight. For a moment, he considered retreating, pretending yesterday had been a figment of shared exhaustion. But a part of him, the part that had never stopped chasing the impossible, urged him forward. He wandered into the staff area and caught sight of her just as she emerged from the pantry, carrying a small basket of cleaning supplies. She froze for an instant, spotting him. Then she nodded politely and continued on her way, as if he were just another figure in the sprawling house. Daniel's chest tightened again. The casual composure she maintained, like a tightrope walker balancing over a canyon, was both infuriating and fascinating. He cleared his throat. "Grace." She paused. "Sir?" I wanted to ask you something," he said, forcing his voice to sound casual, though it shook slightly. "About the violin. About the melody you played yesterday." She straightened slightly, setting the basket down. "It's just a song," she said. Her voice was calm, measured. But there was tension under the surface, a line of restraint she refused to break. Daniel took a step closer, his eyes fixed on her hands. "It's not just a song," he said quietly. "That melody, I know it. And the way you played it, every hesitation, every pause, I've never heard anyone play it like that before. Not anyone." Grace's lips pressed together. She glanced toward the windows, then back at him. "I didn't think anyone here would understand it," she said softly. "Understand what?" he pressed. She shook her head as if shaking the words free from her lips might undo them. "Not yet," she whispered. "Some things take time. Some things need the right moment." Daniel's pulse quickened. He had spent decades running from uncertainty, from vulnerability, from the ache of the unknown. And yet here it was, pressing in on him from all sides, past, present, memory, and possibility. He leaned against the counter, close enough to see the faint scar along her thumb, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched as if resisting the pull of a memory. He realized suddenly that the melody was not just music. It was a key, unlocking a door he hadn't realized had remained closed for 30 years. Grace looked down, and he sensed the moment stretching, fragile and dangerous. She had a secret. Something she had carried with her through every bus ride, every odd job, every sleepless night. And he was on the threshold of discovering it. "Grace," he said, his voice softer now, "there's something between us that hasn't been said. Something important. I don't know if I'm ready to hear it, but I need to try." She met his gaze finally. For a heartbeat, everything else fell away, the house, the city below, the years of separation. There were only the two of them, suspended in the weight of memory and possibility. Her voice came, quiet but firm. "If we start down this path, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to know?" Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to say yes, wanted to brace himself for whatever revelation awaited. But his mouth went dry. He realized that some truths weren't just facts. They were lives in themselves, capable of reshaping everything they touched. He nodded slowly, the motion almost imperceptible. Grace exhaled, long and measured, like a storm held in check. And then she began to speak, her words deliberate, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent in careful silence. "I didn't leave Spokane because I wanted to," she said. "I left because I had no choice. And there's someone you need to know about, someone you never knew existed." Daniel froze. Something in her tone made his stomach drop. The melody, the pause, the memories, it had all been leading to this moment. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "There's a child," she said. The words hit like a hammer. Daniel's mouth went dry. A child. His child. Someone he had never seen? A life that had been growing, breathing, and existing just beyond his reach? He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. His mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, none of them comforting. Grace's next words sliced through the silence, deliberate and measured. "She's alive. And she's remarkable." Daniel's breath caught. Remarkable? Alive? His mind spun faster than it could process. Yet somehow the melody from yesterday played in the back of his mind, weaving through the chaos, anchoring him to something he thought he had lost forever. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls too close. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the counters. A story he had thought ended had only just begun. And Daniel knew with an unshakable certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The pause hung between them, heavier than any word, as both waited for the next revelation, the one that would change everything. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel realized that the past had not only returned, it had come bearing consequences he might not be ready to face. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. But this time, the silence was charged with expectation. What Daniel did not yet know, the truths Grace was about to reveal, would shatter the careful life he had built, and would begin a journey neither of them could have predicted. Daniel could feel the weight of the silence pressing down as he waited for Grace to continue. The kitchen seemed smaller than usual, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what was about to be said. He shifted on his feet uneasily, though he tried to appear calm. Grace adjusted her posture, folding her hands over her lap. Her fingers moved almost imperceptibly, tracing invisible patterns on her jeans. There was a tension about her, controlled, deliberate, but Daniel sensed how tightly it restrained something much deeper, something dangerous to speak aloud. "I didn't tell you the whole story back in Spokane," she began, her voice soft, almost brittle. "Because I wasn't sure, because I didn't know how it would land, and I needed to survive." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the counter, his voice low but urgent. "Grace, whatever it is, I need to know. I've spent decades chasing pieces of my life that I thought were gone. If you keep this from me, I don't know if I can forgive that." She looked up then, meeting his eyes fully for the first time, the color of her irises catching the last of the afternoon light. There was something fierce there, tempered by years of careful restraint. "You might not like it," she warned. "And it's going to change everything you thought you knew about the past. About me. About you." Daniel swallowed, the weight of anticipation pressing against his chest. "I've waited my whole life for the truth," he said. Grace exhaled slowly. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Then listen carefully." She began, her voice measured, each word deliberate. "I left Spokane because I was pregnant. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell anyone. I was 17. Alone. Afraid. And I couldn't." Daniel froze. His mind stuttered. Pregnant? His heart thumped, rapid and erratic, as though it recognized the word before his rational brain could process it. You had a child?" he whispered, though he knew the answer already hung in the air. Grace nodded. Her expression softened in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. "I did. And she grew up. She's out there. She's alive." Daniel's mind raced. A flood of questions, fears, and regrets collided all at once. The child he never knew. The melody he had recognized. The life he thought had been left behind. What happened to her?" he asked, voice tight, almost breaking. Grace's eyes clouded for a moment. "I tried. I fought. But the system took her. They said I couldn't provide what she needed. They promised visits. They promised updates. And then, nothing. The calls stopped. The letters stopped. She was placed with another family far away. And I lost her." Daniel felt a cold rush move through him, an ache so sharp it left him momentarily breathless. The melody from the kitchen yesterday, her hands, the pauses, the notes, suddenly made sense. Every hesitation, every subtle inflection, carried the weight of a lifetime of absence. "Grace," his voice faltered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "Because by the time I knew, by the time it was real, you had a life. A future. I couldn't be the woman who dragged a ghost into it. I didn't want to disrupt your life, or hers." Daniel's mind was spinning. Her name?" he asked cautiously. Grace hesitated, then let it slip, almost under her breath. "Naomi." The name hung in the air, fragile, as if even speaking it aloud could shatter everything. Daniel's chest tightened. Naomi. His daughter. A life he never knew existed, yet had somehow shaped the melody he had heard yesterday, the pauses he had recognized so intimately. He leaned back, gripping the edge of the counter. The world felt suddenly unstable, as if every foundation he had built, his career, his success, his very identity, was shifting beneath him. Grace continued, her voice soft but unwavering. She's remarkable, strong, brilliant, and she doesn't know about you. Not fully. Not yet. Daniel's mind raced through decades of missed opportunities, unanswered questions, and a haunting sense of absence he had never been able to define. His first love, the girl with the violin, the one who had disappeared, had left him a daughter he had never met. "And you," he said finally, voice hoarse, "you played that melody yesterday for her?" Grace shook her head slightly. "No. For me. To remember. To survive. And maybe, to test if the past was still alive. If anyone cared to notice it again." Daniel's throat tightened. The weight of unspoken words pressed down on him. He realized in that moment that the life he thought he had controlled had been quietly, irreversibly shaped by someone else's choices, by secrets, by absence. "And now," he asked, "what do we do now?" Grace's gaze met his, steady, unwavering. "Now we face it, together or apart. But the story has changed. Forever." Daniel exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly on the counter. For the first time in decades he felt unmoored. The past had returned, bringing with it consequences he was only beginning to understand. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel realized that this was just the beginning. Because the child he never knew, Naomi, was out there. Alive. Growing up in a world shaped by choices he hadn't made, in a life he hadn't touched. And he had no idea what she would think when she finally learned the truth. The room seemed suddenly too quiet, too small, too full of expectation. And Daniel knew that the next steps would determine everything. His relationship with Grace, his connection to Naomi, and the very music that had guided him back to the truth. A secret waited to be revealed, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of anticipation in its purest form, equal parts hope and fear. Daniel sat at the edge of the breakfast nook, staring down at his untouched cup of tea. The steam had long since faded, leaving only a faint ring on the wooden table. The room felt heavier than it had all week, though the sun was high, spilling light through the windows. He could hear Grace moving quietly in the kitchen, carefully stacking dishes, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. Every sound reminded him that she was real, that she had carried a secret for decades, and now that secret had collided with his life in a way he could barely comprehend. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You're saying she's alive, Naomi. She exists somewhere out there. And I've never met her." Grace's back was to him, but he could sense her tension. "Yes," she said softly. "And she's remarkable. But you should know, she doesn't know about you." "Not really." Daniel closed his eyes, a tight ache forming in his chest. He had imagined many reunions over the years, naive fantasies where he found her, hugged her, and somehow erased the years of absence. But the reality was different, cold, uncertain. "Do you know where she is?" he asked carefully, trying not to betray the tremor in his voice. Grace turned to face him, a cautious expression on her face. "Not exactly. But I've kept track as much as I could. Social workers, schools, adoption records. It's complicated. And some doors have already closed." Daniel ran his hand through his hair. He felt suddenly small, a man who had built empires yet felt powerless against the twists of fate. "Why didn't you ever try to tell me? Or reach out?" Grace's eyes softened, but there was a sharp edge to her reply. "Because I didn't want to hurt you, or her. You were just a kid yourself, Daniel. And I wasn't ready to be anyone's responsibility." He nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. You wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that he would have shouldered everything, that he could have fought for her. But he knew it wasn't fair. She had survived by making hard choices. Choices he hadn't lived with, hadn't had to. "I understand," he said finally. "But now, what do we do?" Grace hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the table. We find her. But carefully. She deserves to have control over her own story. And we can't pretend we can just step into her life. That's not how it works. Daniel nodded again. The weight of her words sank in. Naomi wasn't just a name. She was a person. A life lived without him. And whatever reunion might happen, it wouldn't erase the years they had lost. For a long moment they sat in silence. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of papers in the corner. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that two lives had just shifted irreversibly. Finally, Daniel spoke, a quiet determination threading his words. Then we do it right. We find her. And we respect her. Grace gave a small nod, though her eyes betrayed a mix of hope and worry. That's all we can do. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. The girl who had vanished from Spokane was now a woman who carried decades of survival, pain, and quiet strength. The violin, the pauses, the secrets, they had all led to this moment. And the melody, Daniel said suddenly, almost to himself. Yesterday, when you played it, it wasn't just music, was it? Grace's lips pressed together. She glanced toward the window, then back at him. No, she admitted softly. It was a memory, a connection, something I didn't think I would ever hear again. Daniel's chest tightened. I hear it now, he whispered. And I remember everything. Her gaze softened. Some memories are meant to survive, Daniel, even when we're not ready to face them. He nodded, a silent promise forming in his mind. A promise to face whatever came next. As they sat there, the room holding its quiet tension, Daniel realized something crucial. The past had returned, yes, but it wasn't here to punish him. It was here to demand that he act, that he take responsibility for what he hadn't known existed. The sound of a car pulling up outside startled both of them. Grace's head snapped toward the window. Daniel's pulse quickened. Who's that? He asked, though he already had a sinking feeling he might know. Grace didn't answer immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she were measuring something beyond the surface. I don't know, she said finally. But I think we might not have long before the next piece of this story finds us. Daniel's stomach twisted. Whatever had just arrived, he sensed it would bring answers, and more questions. And in that moment he understood. The quiet life he thought he had built was over. The past was awake, moving, and ready to reveal truths that could not be ignored. He took a slow breath, bracing himself. Whatever came next, he knew they had to face it together. The melody, the pauses, the secrets, all of it was far from finished. And outside, the car door closed with a definitive click that seemed to echo through the house, heralding the next chapter of a story Daniel was only beginning to understand. The day after the car's arrival, Daniel woke with a strange tension in his chest. The city outside the estate moved on as usual, cars, sirens, distant voices. But inside the Hargrove home, the weight of the previous conversations pressed down on him. Grace had returned quietly, but something in her demeanor had shifted. She moved with careful efficiency, but her eyes betrayed a worry she wasn't speaking aloud. Daniel decided to let her work. He wandered through the house, touching objects he had barely noticed before. The polished counter in the kitchen, the framed photographs of places he had traveled, the violin case sitting on a shelf like a quiet sentinel. His fingers brushed the worn wood, and he couldn't help but remember her playing yesterday, the pauses, the hesitations, the music as a memory. He finally found her in the music room, tucked away in a corner with the violin in her hands again. She wasn't playing yet. She was just holding it, looking down at the strings as if measuring her own courage. "Morning," Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle her. Grace looked up. "Morning," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. There was a tension beneath the calm, an unspoken alertness. "We need to be careful now," she added. Daniel nodded, taking a seat on the edge of a nearby chair. "I get it," he said. "I know we have to tread lightly. Not here to rush anything. She glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the violin. This instrument, she said, lifting it, has seen a lot. It's carried memories I've tried to forget and others I've needed to remember. It's complicated. Daniel watched her. She moved with precision, tuning the instrument with a careful ear. Everything about you feels layered, he said quietly. You've lived more in the past 20 years than most people do in a lifetime. Grace smiled faintly, a small, ironic curl of her lips. Layered is one word for it, she said. Scarred, cautious, stubborn, surviving, those are others. Daniel couldn't help a dry laugh. Fair enough, but none of it makes you invisible. Her gaze met his, and for a brief moment, the guarded exterior softened. Sometimes being invisible is the only way to survive. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. He had spent decades chasing what he thought was lost, never realizing it had been right in front of him in subtle ways, unnoticed, under the guise of invisibility. She finally lifted the bow and drew it lightly across the strings, a single note resonating in the quiet room. It wasn't a melody yet, just a note, careful and deliberate. The sound seemed to anchor them both, a fragile bridge between memory and the present. Do you ever think about Spokane? Daniel asked quietly. Grace's hand stilled for a moment. Every day, she admitted. It wasn't perfect. It was rough. But it was mine in a way nothing else has been. Daniel leaned forward. I remember it too. I remember the music, the way you played, the way you made pauses feel like sentences. Her lips pressed together. I remember you too, she said. Even when I tried not to. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle in the room. For decades, they had lived parallel lives, carrying fragments of each other without ever knowing it fully. Now, those fragments were colliding in ways neither of them could control. Grace began to play softly, a hesitant melody that grew in confidence as she continued. Daniel closed his eyes and listened. The notes weren't perfect. They weren't meant to be. But they carried a truth he had never heard before. Survival, pain, hope, and longing, all intertwined. As the melody faded into silence, she lowered the bow and looked at him. There are things I've kept hidden, Daniel. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I needed to protect her, and myself. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. But I need to know. For Naomi, for us. I need to know everything. Grace's eyes flickered with something between hesitation and resolve. It's time you learned about the life I built after Spokane, she said. The choices I made. The mistakes. The things I never told anyone. Daniel leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense. Start from the beginning, he said. Grace took a deep breath and began, recounting the years after she had left Spokane. Surviving on odd jobs, living in cramped apartments, navigating a world that often felt stacked against her. She spoke of failed relationships, brief friendships that ended too soon, the challenges of being young and pregnant in a society that didn't always make room for her. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could sense the tremor beneath, the weight of decades carried silently. And the violin? He asked after a pause. Grace smiled faintly, a wistful edge to her expression. It was the only thing that kept me from completely disappearing. Playing reminded me of who I was, who I could still be, even when the world tried to erase me. Daniel nodded, absorbing every word. The room felt smaller now, crowded with the weight of her story, and yet it was intimate in a way he hadn't felt in years. He realized that survival, memory, and music had all intertwined to create the person sitting before him. As Grace set the violin back in its case, Daniel felt the first real surge of determination in days. They had a child out there, Naomi, living a life shaped by circumstances neither of them had controlled. We have to find her, he said quietly. Grace nodded. Her gaze hardened, a resolve replacing the vulnerability she had carried moments ago. Yes, but carefully. She needs to have control over her own story. And we have to be ready for whatever we find. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. "We'll be ready," he said. "Together." But as they left the music room, a faint knock echoed from the front door. Daniel froze. Grace's eyes narrowed. The next chapter of their story had arrived. Daniel and Grace froze at the sound of the knock. It wasn't hurried or desperate, just deliberate, polite, as if the person outside already knew exactly who lived in the house. Grace glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "Neither was I." He gestured toward the front door. "Go see who it is. I'll stay here." Grace hesitated, then nodded, moving cautiously through the hall. Daniel followed at a slower pace, his mind racing. Whoever it was, he sensed immediately, had come for more than a casual visit. There was weight in the way the sound had traveled through the house, like someone who had purpose, patience, and maybe even knowledge of what lay inside. When Grace opened the door, a man in his late 40s stood on the porch. His dark suit was immaculate, his posture confident but not intimidating. The kind of person who could command a room without raising his voice. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand. "Miss Turner?" the man asked politely. Grace's body tensed just slightly. "Yes," she said. "May I help you?" "My name is Elliot Harper," he said smoothly. "I work for the Social Services office in Spokane. I have information about a young woman named Naomi, and I was hoping to speak with you." Daniel's pulse jumped. Naomi. His daughter. The one connection he had yet to fully meet. He stepped closer, careful not to startle either of them. Grace's hand tightened around the doorframe. "Information?" she repeated. "What kind of information?" Elliot glanced at Daniel for the first time. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "It's sensitive," he said. "I believe both of you have a right to know, but I need to ensure she's safe first. Naomi is no longer a child in the system. She's almost 19, and she has a right to privacy. We can't just make contact without her consent." Daniel swallowed hard, the weight of his chest pressing down. Grace's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She studied Elliot carefully, as if trying to measure how much truth was hidden beneath his calm exterior. "I understand," she said finally. "I'm her mother. And this is Daniel Hargrove," she added almost reluctantly. Well, you'll understand soon." Elliot nodded once, acknowledging the introduction but not reacting. "I understand more than you might think," he said. "I've been following her case closely. She's been remarkable, excelling in school, showing incredible talent and discipline. But she's had her struggles like all of us. I'm here to help bridge the gap if you both are ready." Daniel felt his stomach twist. The man was calm, professional, but there was an undeniable tension in his words. Naomi had grown up without him, yet here he was, standing on the threshold of her life, faced with the possibility that she might reject him, or worse, never want to know him. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Elliot asked, glancing at both of them. "There are records, documents, and letters she wrote that might help." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she said. "Come in." But quietly. Daniel followed them into the living room. The place felt suddenly too large, the silence heavy with anticipation. Elliot set the briefcase down and opened it carefully, revealing neatly organized folders. "I don't know how much detail you want," he said, "but Naomi's story is complicated. She's independent, strong-willed, and intelligent. But she's also cautious. Everything we do has to respect her autonomy." Daniel leaned forward, heart pounding. "I don't want to scare her. I want to know her. I need to know her." Elliot nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here. You have to approach this delicately. Any sudden moves could push her away. And Grace, you need to prepare her for this too. She might be conflicted about meeting you." Grace's hands tightened in her lap. "I know," she said quietly. "I've tried to imagine this moment for years, but it's real now." Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to process the weight of the conversation. All those years of absence, of unknowable moments, had led to this fragile intersection of past and present. Elliot handed Grace a folder, then another to Daniel. These are letters she wrote to herself as a child, thoughts she kept private, milestones we documented. I thought it might help you understand who she is. Daniel opened the folder with trembling hands. There were school reports, essays, sketches, and a single folded letter addressed to someone she called Mom and Dad, though the handwriting was tentative, unsure. He read it slowly, the words scratching at his chest. Asterisk, I hope one day you find me. I hope you know I am trying. I hope I am enough. Asterisk. His vision blurred. Grace reached out, touching his arm lightly. She is enough, she whispered. And she's incredible. She's lived, survived, and thrived despite everything. Daniel exhaled, swallowing hard. The gravity of it all pressed on him. Naomi existed. She was real. And now, the door to her life had begun to open. Elliot spoke again, voice calm but deliberate. The next step is contact. Carefully. Step by step. Naomi has to choose this as much as you do. One wrong move and she could disappear from both your lives forever. Daniel nodded, absorbing the enormity of the task. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it was here, it terrified him more than he expected. Grace's eyes met his. Are you ready? She asked softly. He looked at her, at the woman who had carried this secret with him unknowingly all these years. I have to be, he said. For her. For us. The three of them sat in tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. Outside the estate was quiet. But inside, Daniel felt the first stirring of something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope tempered by fear, and the undeniable pull of a future that had been waiting to meet them. And somewhere, Daniel knew, Naomi's story was about to intersect with theirs in ways none of them could yet predict. The next morning, Daniel woke to an uneasy quiet. The house was still, but the tension that had crept in yesterday lingered like a shadow. He moved through the halls carefully, feeling every polished surface and echoing footstep, as though the house itself were aware that something had shifted. Grace was already in the kitchen, her movements precise, almost meditative. She was preparing breakfast, but her hands didn't quite meet the rhythm of routine. There was a subtle restlessness in the way she sliced fruit and poured tea. Daniel watched her for a moment, noticing how she paused at times, as if listening for something he couldn't hear. I've been thinking about Naomi, he said finally, breaking the silence. Grace didn't look up immediately. I have too, she admitted quietly. Her voice carried the weight of decades of care and worry. There's a lot to consider. How we approach her, how we introduce ourselves. It's delicate. Daniel nodded. I know. But I can't just sit here and wait. I need to know her, Grace. I need to start somewhere, even if it's just a conversation from a distance. Grace set the knife down and leaned against the counter. You understand that she might not want to meet us, she said. She has her life, her own experiences. And if we rush, if we push too hard, we could lose her forever. I understand, Daniel said, his tone firm. But we can't let fear dictate this. She's our daughter. She deserves to know us, at least the truth. Grace studied him for a long moment. There was a flicker of admiration in her eyes, but also the shadow of anxiety. Okay, she said finally. We do it carefully. But first, we need to know more about her routine. About what she likes, who she trusts. Elliot can help us with that. Daniel nodded again. Then we start there. Step by step. Later that day, Elliot returned, bringing a more detailed file on Naomi. He had tracked her progress through high school, her part-time work, and her volunteer activities. She had grown into an intelligent, cautious young woman, fiercely independent yet remarkably compassionate. She's doing well, Elliot said, laying the file on the table. But she's been through a lot. Her guardians didn't tell her everything about her past, and she's been cautious about trusting anyone new. Daniel leaned over the papers, scanning the notes and sketches Naomi had made over the years. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, thoughtful. There was an earnestness in every essay, every journal entry, that made his chest tighten. "She's cautious," Grace repeated softly. "That's understandable. But she's also curious, intelligent. And if we approach her right, she might listen." Daniel exhaled slowly. "We have to get it right. This isn't about us, it's about her." Elliot nodded. "Exactly. And the first step is subtle contact. A letter, perhaps. Something that acknowledges her independence and respects her right to choose." Grace and Daniel exchanged a glance. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on them. This wasn't a business deal or a corporate strategy. It was a human life, fragile and delicate, waiting to respond or recoil. As they worked through the plan, Daniel felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. Every step forward felt like balancing on a tightrope. One misstep could send everything tumbling into chaos. Finally, Elliot laid out a proposed approach. A carefully worded letter introducing Daniel and Grace, acknowledging Naomi's independence, and expressing a desire to meet only if she felt ready. There would be no pressure, no expectations, only the truth and the offer of connection. Daniel read the draft slowly, absorbing every word. "It's perfect," he said finally. "Simple, honest, respectful." Grace nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "It has to be," she said. "Anything else could backfire." They agreed to send the letter that afternoon, through a secure and private channel, ensuring Naomi's privacy and safety. It was a small step, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. As they finalized the plan, Daniel couldn't help but glance at Grace. "Thank you for trusting me," he said quietly. "For letting me be part of this." Grace met his gaze, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. "We're in this together now," she said. "For Naomi. And for whatever comes next." The three of them sat in tense anticipation, knowing that once the letter was sent, nothing could be undone. The past, long hidden and fragile, was now moving toward the present, carrying with it hope, fear, and the possibility of reunion. Outside, the estate remained calm, indifferent to the storm that had quietly begun within its walls. But inside, Daniel, Grace, and Elliot knew that the next chapter of their lives, and Naomi's, was about to begin. And somewhere, far away, Naomi would soon hold the first piece of the truth she had been waiting for her entire life. The waiting was worse than Daniel expected. After the letter was sent, time seemed to stretch unnaturally inside the house. Hours felt longer than entire weeks had before. Daniel tried to distract himself with work calls, but every spreadsheet blurred into the same meaningless shapes. His assistants noticed his silences, the long pauses before he answered simple questions. Eventually he shut his laptop and pushed it aside. Grace felt it too. She moved through the house quietly, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping already clean surfaces. Every so often she checked her phone, then set it down again, face unreadable. The violin stayed in its case. For the first time since Daniel had heard her play, she didn't reach for it. "You don't have to stay busy," Daniel said gently from the doorway. Grace didn't turn around. "If I stop moving, I'll start imagining things I can't control." He understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. Late that afternoon, Elliot called. Daniel answered on the first ring, his voice steady only because he forced it to be. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, listening. "She received the letter," Elliot said. His tone was neutral, careful. "She didn't respond immediately. But she didn't reject it either." Daniel exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What does that mean?" "It means she read it." "More than once," Elliot replied. "She asked questions. About timing. About intent. About whether this was temporary curiosity or something permanent." Grace closed her eyes. "And?" she asked quietly. "And she asked for proof," Elliot said. "Not money. Not status. Proof of honesty." Daniel frowned. What kind of proof? She wants to know why now, Elliot said. Why, after all these years, this truth suddenly matters. The question landed hard. Daniel leaned back against the wall, the weight of it pressing into his chest. He had asked himself the same thing over and over since Grace played that melody. Why now? Why had fate chosen this moment instead of a dozen others? Because I didn't know, Daniel said finally. Because the moment I did, I couldn't ignore it. Elliot was quiet for a beat. That's what you'll need to show her. Not explain away. Show. After the call ended, silence returned, thicker than before. Grace sat down slowly, her hands clasped together. She's protecting herself, she said. That's good. That means she's thinking. Daniel nodded. But it also means she's suspicious. And she should be. Grace looked at him, then really looked at him. Daniel, there's something you don't know. His pulse quickened. What is it? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. When I left Spokane, I didn't just disappear. I tried to reach out. Once. Daniel's breath caught. You did? Yes, she said. I sent a letter. I never got a response. The room felt suddenly smaller. I never received anything, Daniel said immediately. I swear to you. I believe you, Grace said. But that letter changed everything for me. When no answer came, I assumed you'd made your choice. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, anger and regret twisting together. Someone intercepted it. Or it got lost. Or, he stopped himself. Either way, Naomi grew up believing she was wanted by only one parent. That's on me whether I knew or not. Grace swallowed. And that's what she's afraid of. That this is temporary. That once curiosity fades, so will you. Daniel walked closer, lowering himself in front of her. Then I need to give her something real. Something that doesn't disappear. Grace studied his face. Careful, she warned. Promises are dangerous. I know, he said. That's why I'm not making one lightly. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at an old photograph he'd kept tucked away for years. 2 teenagers. A cheap violin case. A smile frozen in time, unaware of everything coming for them. Near dawn, his phone vibrated. A message. A known number. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as he opened it. It was short. I read your letter. I have questions. If you're serious, answer them. Not through anyone else. Through me. No name. No warmth. No rejection. Just a door cracked open. Daniel stared at the screen, knowing that whatever he said next could shape the rest of all their lives. And somewhere across the city, Naomi was waiting to see if the truth would finally hold. Daniel didn't answer the message right away. He read it again. Then again. Each word felt measured, guarded, like Naomi had weighed every possible interpretation before sending it. There was no anger in the message. No warmth either. Just caution. Control. Grace stood in the doorway watching him quietly. She didn't ask what it said. She already knew. She reached out, Daniel said finally, his voice low. Directly. Grace nodded once and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. That's significant, she said. It means she wants agency. She doesn't want intermediaries shaping the truth. Daniel rubbed his palms together slowly. What if I say the wrong thing? Grace met his eyes. Then you correct it. Real people don't get it perfect. She'll sense honesty faster than polish. He looked back at the screen. The cursor blinked, impatient. After several false starts, Daniel began to type. I'm answering myself because you asked me to. I didn't know about you until recently. Not because I didn't care, but because I was kept in the dark. The moment I learned the truth, everything else stopped mattering. He paused. Deleted the last sentence. Tried again. I won't pretend timing makes sense. It doesn't. All I can tell you is that I'm here now, and I'm not looking for something temporary. He stopped again. His chest felt tight. The words sounded too close to a promise. Grace spoke gently. Tell her something only you could say. Daniel thought for a moment. Then his fingers moved again. I still remember the song your mother used to play when she was nervous. She would stop halfway through, start again, and pretend it was intentional. I didn't understand back then. I do now. He stared at the message. It felt dangerously personal. Honest. He sent it. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Grace busied herself in the kitchen, though Daniel noticed she wasn't really cooking. She was listening for the vibration of his phone just as intently as he was. When it finally buzzed, both of them froze. Daniel read the reply slowly. You remembered the pauses. That matters. But memory isn't commitment. I don't want explanations. I want consistency. If we talk, it has to be on my terms. Daniel exhaled, relief and fear colliding. She's not closing the door. Grace nodded. She's setting boundaries. That's healthy. Another message followed almost immediately. I'll meet you once. In public. No surprises. No stories prepared in advance. Daniel typed back without hesitation. Agreed. The location came seconds later. A small cafe near a community college campus. Neutral. Busy enough to feel safe. Grace sat down across from him slowly. This is it, she said. The first time she sees you is more than an idea. Daniel nodded. What if she hates me? Grace didn't soften the truth. She might. Or she might not. Either way, she deserves to feel what she feels. The morning of the meeting arrived too quickly. Daniel stood in front of the mirror longer than he had in years. He didn't want to look impressive. He didn't want to look distant either. In the end, he chose simplicity. Something that didn't announce wealth or power. Grace watched him from the doorway. Remember, she said quietly, don't try to win her over. Just be present. The cafe smelled like coffee and rain-soaked pavement. Daniel arrived early and chose a table near the window. Every time the door opened, his pulse jumped. Then she walked in. Naomi didn't look around nervously. She scanned the room with sharp awareness, spotted him immediately, and approached without hesitation. She looked nothing like the child in the file folders. She was taller than he expected. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were alert, observant. Daniel, she said, not sitting yet. Yes, he replied, standing instinctively. She studied him for a long second, then sat down. You look ordinary, she said flatly. He nodded. I am. That seemed to surprise her. They ordered coffee. Silence stretched between them, thick but not hostile. Finally, Naomi spoke. I'm not here to fill a gap in your life, she said. And I'm not looking for anything from you. Not money. Not guilt. Not rescue. Daniel held her gaze. I'm not here to give those things. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. Then why are you here? Daniel answered honestly. Because you exist, and because not knowing you feels wrong. Naomi leaned back, studying him again. People say things when they want access, she said. Time tells the truth. Daniel nodded. Then let time speak. She stood up slowly. This was the meeting, she said. If you want another, you'll wait to hear from me. As she walked toward the door, she paused. One more thing, she added without turning around. My life is stable. Don't disrupt it unless you're prepared to stay. Then she was gone. Daniel sat there, heart pounding, knowing he had just passed the first test. But he also knew something else. Naomi hadn't told him everything. And neither had Grace. Grace didn't ask how it went when Daniel came home. She didn't need to. She saw it in the way he moved through the doorway, slower than usual, as if the air itself had grown heavier. He set his keys down carefully, too carefully, then stood there for a moment like someone waiting for permission to breathe. She's formidable, he said at last. Grace nodded. She always was. That stopped him. He turned toward her. You're saying that like you already knew. Grace busied herself at the sink, rinsing a mug that was already clean. I knew her strength, she said quietly. I didn't know what shape it would take. Daniel leaned against the counter. She doesn't want explanations. She wants consistency. She made that very clear. Grace smiled faintly. That's how she survived. There was a pause. A longer one. Grace, Daniel said carefully, what didn't you tell me? Her hands stilled. For a moment, Daniel thought she might deflect or soften it, or postpone it the way people do when the truth feels too sharp to handle. Instead, she turned off the faucet and faced him fully. I didn't just leave Spokane because I was scared, she said. I left because someone made it clear staying would cost me everything. Daniel straightened. Who? Grace hesitated, then exhaled. Your father. The words landed hard, like a dropped instrument shattering silence. That's not possible, Daniel said automatically. He barely acknowledged my existence back then. That's why you never suspected him, Grace replied. He found me after I told you I was pregnant. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He offered solutions. Daniel felt a slow, cold sensation creep up his spine. What kind of solutions? Grace's jaw tightened. Money, connections, a quiet future. He said you were young, distracted, unfocused. That a child would derail you. And that if I truly cared about you, I'd disappear. Daniel shook his head. He wouldn't? He did, Grace cut in, her voice firm but not loud. And when I refused, the offers turned into warnings. About scholarships being revoked. About landlords suddenly changing their minds. About opportunities drying up. Daniel sat down heavily. I thought I was protecting you, Grace continued. I thought if I left cleanly without drama, you'd never even know what you'd been spared. And Naomi? Daniel asked, his voice rough. Grace swallowed. I told your father about her once. Just once. I thought he should know. 2 weeks later, my job vanished. My landlord raised the rent overnight. And I received a letter implying that if I pursued support, my life would become very complicated. Daniel closed his eyes. The room felt smaller, tighter. That's why the letter never reached you, Grace said softly. Someone made sure it didn't. Anger flared hot and sudden in Daniel's chest. Not the distant irritation he felt toward his father in adulthood, but something raw and personal. A theft. A manipulation that had shaped all their lives without his consent. Naomi doesn't know this, he said. No, Grace replied. And she doesn't need to. Not unless she asks. Daniel ran a hand over his face. She already senses there's more. Grace nodded. She's always been perceptive. That evening, Daniel received another message from Naomi. I looked you up, it read. Your foundation work doesn't match your reputation. That's confusing. Daniel typed back carefully. People are rarely one thing. Her reply came minutes later. My adoptive guardian used to say that too. Right before he lied. Daniel stared at the words, a chill settling in his chest. What happened with her guardian? He asked. There was a long pause before the response came. He died last year, Naomi wrote. And the truth about him didn't die with him. Daniel's phone felt suddenly heavy in his hand. What truth? He typed. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. He wasn't supposed to be the one who chose me, Naomi finally wrote. He was assigned after someone else stepped in and changed my placement. Someone with influence. Daniel's breath caught. Across the room, Grace looked up as if she felt the shift without hearing the words. Daniel stood slowly. Grace, he said, his voice tight, we may not be the only ones who've been circling Naomi's life. Grace met his gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. And some of those circles, she said quietly, were never meant to be kind. Outside, night settled over the city, calm and indifferent. But the past, long buried, carefully managed, was beginning to surface. And it was far more tangled than any of them had imagined. The morning after the revelations, Daniel couldn't focus on anything. The city outside the Hargrove estate moved on as usual, oblivious to the storms brewing inside. He wandered the halls, absently touching the smooth surfaces of furniture, the cold brass of door handles, anything to anchor himself. Grace was already awake, quietly organizing papers in the study. She didn't look up when he entered. He hesitated at the doorway. "I need to know everything," he said quietly. "About the guardians, about Naomi's placements, about whoever was influence." Grace finally looked at him, her eyes steady. "You do," she said. "But you have to be careful. Some of these people still have power and they don't always play fair. This isn't just about finding her, it's about navigating a system that's complicated and sometimes dangerous." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. But Naomi deserves to know the truth." Grace motioned for him to sit. She pulled a folder from the stack she had been organizing. "This was part of what Elliot shared with me," she said. "I kept it in reserve until you were ready. It outlines everything that happened after I left Spokane, the placements, the guardians, the letters, everything that was manipulated." Daniel leaned forward, running his hands over the folder. His fingers trembled slightly. "Let me see it." Grace handed it over. As he flipped through the pages, the reality settled in. Every placement Naomi had gone through, every note and letter she had written, every guardian assigned or removed, it was meticulously recorded. And underneath it all, faint traces of outside influence. Notes that weren't just administrative but strategic. Deliberate choices that had shaped her life. Daniel's eyes widened. "This isn't random," he said, his voice taut. Someone wanted her life directed, controlled. Not for her, but for themselves." Grace nodded. "Exactly. And that's why Elliot was careful. He doesn't want anyone acting rashly because some of these people are still in positions of authority. We can't make mistakes." Daniel leaned back, his mind racing. But why? Who would do this? And why target Naomi specifically? Grace's hands tightened around the edge of the desk. "Because she's connected to both of us," she said. "To me, yes. But to your family, that connection matters more than you realize. And some people have always seen her as a lever." Daniel felt a cold wave run through him. A lever. Naomi had been living under manipulation her entire life, and they hadn't even known it. He felt a surge of guilt, anger, and determination all at once. "I won't let her be used like that," he said firmly. "I can't undo the past, but I can protect her from it now." Grace studied him for a long moment. "We need a plan. And we need to do it without alarming her, or the people who might still be watching." Daniel nodded. "Then we start by gathering everything. Every record, every letter, every piece of information that tells us who tried to manipulate her life. Then we make sure we control the narrative before she even knows the extent of it." Grace exhaled slowly. "It won't be easy. Some of these people have deep roots. They've influenced not just Naomi's guardians but schools, scholarships, and even social circles. It's bigger than I thought." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we have to be smarter. Faster. Careful but decisive. She deserves that." Grace's eyes softened. "She does. And we can't forget one thing, she needs to feel safe. Whatever steps we take, Naomi must remain in control. She can't feel like she's being rescued, coerced, or manipulated again." Daniel nodded, determination settling over him like armor. "Then we do it on her terms. Step by step. But we don't wait any longer than necessary." They spent the rest of the morning going through the documents, cross-referencing letters, guardianship notes, and school records. Every page Daniel touched, every name he saw, was a reminder of how close Naomi had come to losing herself in a system designed to shape her life without her knowledge. By mid-afternoon they had a clearer picture. There were gaps, of course, but enough to understand the scope. Naomi's life had been directed in subtle but intentional ways, and some of the decisions had been influenced by people with connections to Daniel's family. Grace closed the folder and looked at him. We know enough to act, she said. But we need to be careful about how we approach her. She already knows parts of the story, she's perceptive. She'll sense if we hide anything. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Then honesty, transparency, and patience, he said. Those are our weapons now. Grace nodded. Yes. And timing. Everything has to happen at the right moment, or we risk losing her trust forever. Daniel glanced at the clock. The day was slipping away, and yet every second felt crucial. He realized that the hardest part wasn't just finding Naomi, it was preparing her for the truth about everyone who had tried to control her life. And somewhere in the quiet of the city, Naomi was living her own life, unaware of the storm that was gathering around her. But Daniel knew this. When she learned the truth, everything would change. And this time they had to be ready. Daniel sat at his desk late that night, the city skyline glowing faintly through the window. His eyes were bloodshot from hours of reading, cross-referencing guardianship files, letters, and school records. The deeper he dug, the clearer the pattern became, and the more unsettling it felt. Someone had intentionally shaped Naomi's life. Not out of malice toward her directly, but as part of a larger design, a web of influence that touched Daniel's family, the social system, and even the legal structures meant to protect children. Every guardian she had, every placement, had been subtly orchestrated. And the name that kept appearing in different contexts, the person whose fingerprints were on nearly all of it, was someone Daniel had once trusted implicitly. Grace came in quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. She didn't speak at first, just placed one in front of him. "You look like hell," she said softly. Daniel gave a tight smile. "Thanks. You don't either, though." She shrugged. "I've been awake for hours already. The layers of manipulation. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was this deep." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "And the hardest part? Naomi doesn't know the extent of it yet. We have to figure out how to protect her without frightening her, or making her think her entire life was a lie." Grace nodded. "Exactly. And there's another risk. Whoever did this, they still have influence. If they learn we're investigating, Naomi could be pulled back into their orbit before she even realizes what's happening." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "Then we need to act fast. But smart. We can't let anger drive us. Not yet." For the next few hours they divided the work. Grace handled background checks, contacting former social workers and analyzing letters. Daniel traced connections, building a map of influence, seeing the web for the first time. With every link they uncovered, the reality became sharper. Naomi's life had been carefully directed, but now the web could work in their favor if they moved strategically. By early morning they had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. First, they needed to secure Naomi's independence, legally and emotionally. Next, they needed to prepare her for the truths she hadn't yet discovered, without overwhelming her. And finally, they would need to confront the person who had orchestrated so much, but only when the time was right. Daniel rubbed his eyes. "It's a lot," he admitted. "And it's terrifying. I keep imagining her finding out all at once, and shutting us out forever." Grace reached across the desk, placing her hand over his. "She won't," she said softly. "She's resilient. She's cautious, yes, but she's also thoughtful. She'll see that we're on her side. And that matters more than anything." Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling some weight lift. But a gnawing anxiety remained. They were about to move into dangerous territory, and every step could either bring Naomi closer or push her away permanently. Suddenly Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. He opened it carefully, bracing himself. "I know someone is watching me. I feel it. I don't know what's real anymore." His heart hammered. He showed the message to Grace immediately. "She feels it," she said, her voice tight. "Whatever we uncover, we need to reassure her. She already senses the manipulation. If we're not careful, she might shut down completely." Daniel nodded. then the first move isn't confrontation. It's protection. We need to make sure she knows she's safe, that someone's on her side. Grace agreed. And then, we reveal slowly, step by step. Give her pieces she can process, rather than the whole storm at once. Daniel stared at the message again. Naomi had unknowingly stumbled onto part of the web that had controlled her life. And now, the next move they made would determine whether she trusted them, or withdrew entirely. He felt a cold, sinking clarity. This wasn't just about reconnecting with their daughter anymore. This was about dismantling a lifetime of manipulation, and protecting her from the people who had orchestrated it. Outside, the city stirred awake, indifferent to the hidden battles unfolding within quiet homes and quiet hearts. Daniel and Grace looked at each other, knowing that the second major challenge was no longer a question of if, but how. And somewhere, Naomi's instincts were already leading her toward truths she wasn't ready to hear, but that they couldn't ignore any longer. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Hargrove estate, but Daniel felt no warmth. He sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread before him, lines and names forming a map that made his chest tighten. Each connection, each decision, every subtle influence on Naomi's life, it all pointed to someone who had been orchestrating events with surgical precision. Grace joined him, carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. She placed one carefully in front of him. "We can't afford mistakes," she said softly. "Not now. Not ever." Daniel nodded. "I know. But the problem is, how do you confront someone who has shaped so much of your daughter's life, without scaring her or putting her in danger?" Grace leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "We start with information. Knowledge is power, but timing is everything. Naomi can't be blindsided. And neither can the person behind all this." Daniel rubbed his temples. "She already suspects something. That last message, it's clear she's aware someone is watching her." Grace nodded. "And that gives us an advantage. She's perceptive. She'll pick up on our sincerity if we're careful. But it also means whoever's manipulating her might realize we're close to uncovering them." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of responsibility pressing down. "We need a plan. A precise, careful plan." They spent the morning reviewing the connections in the web, tracing emails, letters, and financial influences. It was meticulous work, the kind that required patience, intuition, and unwavering focus. With every line they followed, the scope of control over Naomi's life became clearer and more frightening. By afternoon, a pattern emerged. Someone close to Daniel's family, someone he had once trusted implicitly, had been pulling strings for decades. Manipulating guardianships, influencing schools, even controlling social circles Naomi had entered. And now, with Naomi beginning to sense the manipulation, the stakes had grown exponentially. "She's strong," Grace said quietly, breaking the silence. "But if this person realizes we're investigating, Naomi could be pulled back into their orbit before she even understands the extent of it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we act carefully. Every step must prioritize her safety and trust. No shortcuts. No assumptions." They decided the next move. Naomi would need to be subtly reassured of her independence and safety. A controlled, small interaction that allowed her to feel in charge while they gathered more information. It was a delicate balance, but it was the only way forward. Daniel drafted a careful message, one that emphasized her autonomy, her strength, and their respect for her boundaries. He reread it 5 times, adjusting every word to ensure sincerity without overstepping. Finally, he sent it. Minutes passed like hours. Daniel and Grace barely breathed. Every sound outside the estate, the distant hum of traffic, a bird calling, the wind brushing against the trees, felt amplified. Then Naomi's reply arrived. Asterisk, "I'll meet you. But we meet on my terms. Public place. Brief. I want to know you but carefully. I've learned the hard way." Asterisk. Daniel read the message aloud. Grace's eyes softened. "She's setting boundaries. That's good. That's healthy. He nodded. But it also confirms what I feared. She's been through more than we realized. Someone has controlled too much of her life. And we have to tread lightly or risk losing her completely. The next day they arranged the meeting. A quiet cafe, neutral territory. Daniel dressed simply, deliberately avoiding anything that might intimidate or impress. Grace accompanied him, a silent anchor. When Naomi arrived, her eyes were sharp, assessing, protective. She had grown into someone remarkable, tall, poised, careful. She scanned the room, spotted them immediately, and approached without hesitation. Daniel stood. "Naomi," he said quietly. "Daniel," she replied, her voice steady. "You look ordinary." He smiled faintly. "I am." They sat, ordered coffee, and for a few minutes silence filled the space. Then Naomi spoke. "I'm not here to fill a gap in your life. I'm not looking for money, guilt, or rescue. I'm not here to offer any of that," Daniel said. "Just to exist in your life if you let me." Her eyes studied him. "Time will tell," she said. "I've learned that trust isn't given, it's earned." Daniel nodded. "Then let time speak." As she left the cafe, she paused briefly. "My life is stable. Don't disrupt it unless you're prepared to stay." Daniel watched her go, heart pounding. Naomi had passed her first test. But the real challenge, the one that would change everything, was still ahead. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the careful maneuvers, the invisible battles, and the delicate threads of trust being woven inside a small cafe. Daniel and Grace knew one thing. The next step would bring Naomi closer to truths she wasn't ready to hear, and put all of them in a position where mistakes could no longer be afforded. The second major twist was approaching, and when it hit, it would change everything. Daniel spent the next few days in a strange, tense limbo. Naomi had made it clear she wanted control, and he had learned to respect that. But every time his phone buzzed, he flinched, wondering if it was her or someone else. Grace moved through the estate with quiet determination, organizing documents, tracing lines of influence, and quietly preparing for the moment they would need to confront the person who had manipulated Naomi's life. "I've been thinking," Grace said one evening as they sat in the study, the stack of papers between them forming a miniature fortress of evidence. "We need to anticipate their next move. Whoever orchestrated Naomi's placements, they're clever. They won't sit quietly while we start asking questions." Daniel nodded. "And we can't involve Naomi until we're sure it's safe. She already knows something is off. If she feels we're acting recklessly, she'll shut down completely." Grace picked up a folder and tapped it gently. "This is the timeline. Every placement, every guardian, every scholarship influenced. Whoever is behind this left patterns. And those patterns are predictable, if we read them carefully." Daniel leaned in, tracing the lines with his finger. "It's astonishing how deliberate it all was. And now we finally see it." Grace's voice was soft but firm. "Yes, and that's the key. We need to strike strategically, not emotionally. We protect Naomi first, then confront." Daniel exhaled slowly. It's terrifying to think someone had that much control over her life, and that she didn't even know. Grace looked at him, eyes steady. "It's more than terrifying. It's why we need to be precise. This person still has reach. One wrong move, and Naomi could be pulled back under their influence before we even have a chance to protect her." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we act carefully. Every step must prioritize her safety and trust. No shortcuts. No assumptions." They spent hours poring over evidence, planning the confrontation carefully. Each document, letter, and record was a piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle was immense. Finally, they identified a potential first point of contact, the person who had orchestrated the majority of Naomi's placements. Someone within Daniel's own family network. It was subtle, insidious, and calculated, the perfect combination to manipulate a child's life without ever drawing attention. "We can't confront them openly," Grace said, her tone low. Not yet. We need a controlled environment. Somewhere neutral where we have oversight and where Naomi can remain safe. Daniel nodded. Agreed. And we gather evidence first. We document everything. That way when we confront them we're prepared for denials, deflections, everything. The following week, Daniel and Grace arranged a discreet meeting. It was set in a neutral location, a private conference room in a small legal office. They brought the compiled evidence, the timeline, letters, and financial records. Every piece was verified, organized, and ready. When the person arrived, Daniel felt a chill. They were calm, polite, and charming in a way that masked a razor-sharp edge. Everything about them screamed control, precision, and power. Daniel, Grace, the person said smoothly. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes didn't waver. You know why we're here. The person's smile didn't falter. I have no idea what you mean. Grace stepped forward, placing the folder on the table. We have every placement, every guardian, every influence you had on Naomi's life documented. We know what you did and we're giving you a chance to explain before we take further steps. The person's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to them. For a split second, the mask of calmness cracked. Then it returned. You think you can threaten me? They asked, voice low. You think you understand what you're dealing with? Daniel's heart pounded, but he stayed composed. We're not threatening. We're protecting Naomi. And if you cared for her at all, you'd understand why that matters. The person leaned back, a calculated smile returning. Naomi, she's resourceful. Clever. Perhaps too clever for her own good. But she's resilient. I'll admit that. You've given her some freedom, but you can't erase everything. Grace's eyes narrowed. We're not trying to erase anything. We're trying to give her a choice she's never had. And if you try to manipulate her again, there will be consequences. The room fell silent for a long moment. Then the person's smile faded, replaced by something sharper. Recognition, perhaps even fear. You're more prepared than I expected, they said. This could get interesting. Daniel and Grace exchanged a glance. This was the first real sign that their investigation, their careful planning, had unsettled someone who had always been untouchable. As they left the room, Daniel felt a surge of both relief and tension. They had confronted the orchestrator, but the battle was far from over. Naomi's life had been shaped by this person, and now, more than ever, their daughter's trust, and their ability to protect her, would be tested. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. But inside Daniel, Grace, and Naomi's world, a storm was building. And when it finally broke, it would change everything. The days after the confrontation were tense, almost unbearably so. Daniel and Grace returned to the estate, their minds still circling the sharp edges of the meeting. The orchestrator's calm menace lingered in the room like a shadow that refused to lift. Did you see that? Daniel asked quietly, pacing the study. For a second I thought they might actually snap. But they didn't. They just measured us. Grace leaned back in her chair, hands clasped. That's what's frightening. They're used to controlling outcomes. And now, they know we're no longer predictable. That's why Naomi is their leverage. She's the only variable they can't fully control. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So everything they've done, every placement, every decision, it was to test, to manipulate her. And now, because she's aware, they feel threatened. Grace nodded. Yes. And that's why our next move is critical. We can't rush Naomi. She has to process the reality herself in her own time. But we need to offer her clarity, stability, and evidence, proof she can trust. For the next few days, Daniel and Grace coordinated carefully, preparing a controlled introduction of the truth to Naomi. They compiled the timeline, letters, guardianship records, and financial documents, arranging them in a way that she could absorb without feeling attacked or manipulated. Then the call came. Naomi's voice on the phone was calm but firm. I've been thinking, she said, about everything. About you, about the orchestrator, about my life. I want to see you. And I want answers. But only in a place I feel safe. My terms. Daniel's chest tightened. Of course. Your choice, your rules. She gave him an address, a small music studio near the university. Neutral, open, and public enough to feel safe. When they arrived, Naomi was already there, her violin case resting beside her chair. She looked composed, but Daniel could see the tension in her eyes, the alertness in every movement. Daniel. Grace, she said, standing as they approached. Thank you for coming. I hope you understand why I'm cautious. Daniel nodded. We do. And we'll respect your boundaries, every step of the way. They sat, the documents between them. Grace explained calmly, Naomi, we've discovered who influenced your life over the years. Every placement, every guardian, every opportunity, it was guided by someone outside your immediate life. Someone with power and influence. We want to show you the facts and only the facts. No assumptions, no exaggeration. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. I had a feeling, she said quietly. But seeing it, it's different. Realer. Daniel nodded. We know it's overwhelming. And it's painful. But we want you to understand it fully so you can make your own choices. They went through the documents carefully, step by step. Letters, financial records, guardianship notes, everything laid bare. Naomi read quietly, absorbed, asking pointed questions. Her expression shifted between disbelief, anger, and cautious comprehension. Then finally she set the last letter down and looked at Daniel. So all these years, someone decided for me. Who I could live with, who I could trust, what opportunities one could have. And no one told me. Daniel swallowed hard. Yes, and we're sorry you had to live through that without knowing. But you deserve to understand it and to reclaim control now. Naomi's fingers traced the edge of her violin case. I thought the world was simple. Safe. And now, I don't know what to trust. Grace leaned forward gently. You can trust yourself. And you can trust us to support you. That's the first step. Naomi took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. I don't know if I can forgive them. Or even understand why it happened. Daniel said quietly, you don't have to forgive yet. But you can start by knowing the truth. And from there you decide every step. Then, unexpectedly, Naomi opened her violin case. There's one thing I do remember, she said softly. She lifted the instrument, ran her fingers along the strings and began to play. It was the same melody Daniel had heard so long ago, the one Grace had once played for him. But now it came from Naomi. Her expression was guarded, but her hands moved with confidence, the music carrying both strength and sorrow. Daniel froze, his heart clenching. This was not just music. This was memory, identity, and resilience all intertwined. Naomi had inherited something deeper than just talent. She had inherited courage and she was claiming it for herself. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she remained quiet, letting the moment speak for itself. As the last notes faded into the air, Daniel realized something important. Naomi was no longer just reacting to the past. She was asserting herself, reclaiming her story, and no one, not the orchestrator, not the world, could take that from her. And for the first time, Daniel felt a cautious hope. The second major twist had revealed the full scope of manipulation, but it had also illuminated Naomi's strength and the real power she now held. Outside, the city moved on unaware. But inside the studio, a new chapter had begun. A chapter where Naomi's voice, her choices, and her courage would define the path forward. The days following Naomi's revelation were quieter, but the quiet carried a weight of anticipation. Daniel and Grace both sensed it. The emotional storm had passed, but now a new phase was beginning. One where trust, healing, and genuine connection had to be carefully nurtured. Daniel spent the mornings working alongside Grace, reviewing the documents again, cross-referencing names and dates, and ensuring that every thread of manipulation had been accounted for. It wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore. It was about safeguarding Naomi's future. "She's processing everything," Grace said one afternoon as they sat in the study, sipping tea. "It won't happen all at once. She's strong, but she's also cautious. And she's allowed to be. You have to respect that." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of his own impatience. I want to do more. I want her to see that I am here for her, that none of this is my fault." Grace smiled faintly. "None of it is. But the proof isn't in explanations. It's in consistency. Show up. Be present. Be reliable. And she'll come to see that for herself." That evening, Daniel received a message from Naomi. Short. Measured. Asterisk, "I want to see you. At home. I have something to show you." Asterisk. He felt a surge of nerves and excitement. Naomi had never invited him into her personal space before. Not fully, not like this. This was significant. When he arrived, Grace followed silently, offering support but giving him space. Naomi opened the door, her expression calm but alert. She didn't invite them in immediately, instead motioning them into the living room where the soft glow of a lamp illuminated her violin on the stand. "I wanted you to see this first," she said quietly. "I've been practicing. I think I'm ready to play something for you." Daniel's chest tightened. He nodded, trying to mask the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'd be honored." Naomi lifted the violin, positioned it under her chin, and began to play. The notes were precise, deliberate, and yet full of emotion. Daniel recognized the melody immediately, the same one Grace had played, the same one that had once frozen his heart in recognition. But now it was Naomi's interpretation, confident, strong, and filled with a depth of feeling that was entirely her own. As she played, Daniel noticed small details. Her eyes occasionally flicked to him, gauging his reaction, yet her focus never wavered. She was asserting herself, not performing for him, but including him in her world. When the final note hung in the air, Daniel exhaled slowly. He couldn't speak immediately. The room was heavy with emotion, with unspoken words, with the quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had all endured. Finally, Naomi spoke. "That's everything I've been holding back. That's the part of me that no one could control." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady but full of feeling. "And it's beautiful. Every note, every pause, every nuance, you made it your own." Grace smiled softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You've both come a long way," she said quietly. "And it's only the beginning." Naomi set down her violin carefully. I want more than answers. I want a relationship that's real, honest, and I want it to be on my terms like I've always said. But I'm willing to try. With both of you." Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll follow your terms, Naomi. Every step. You're in control." Grace reached out, touching Naomi's shoulder gently. "And we'll be here. Every step. No surprises, no manipulation, just support." For the first time in years, Daniel felt a fragile, cautious hope. The orchestrator had been confronted, the truth had been revealed, and Naomi had reclaimed her agency. What remained was the slow work of building a genuine connection, trust by trust, day by day. As they sat together, talking softly about music, memories, and small, ordinary things, Daniel realized something profound. Life could be unpredictable and painful, but it could also offer moments of clarity, reconciliation, and genuine love. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the quiet triumphs happening within the small apartment. And inside, Daniel, Grace, and Naomi were beginning to write a new story, one where choice, truth, and connection finally guided the way. But even as the night settled in, Daniel couldn't shake the awareness that the past had left its mark. They had survived the storm, but the world was not always kind. And the final step, full reconciliation and healing, was still ahead. The morning light spilled through the curtains of Naomi's apartment, soft and warm, but Daniel felt the weight of the past years pressing gently against him. Today was different. Today felt like a beginning, not because everything was perfect but because everything was real. Naomi had insisted on hosting breakfast, a small, casual affair. She had set the table herself, placing the silverware neatly and arranging fresh flowers in a glass vase. Daniel noticed the attention to detail, the quiet care in every small choice she had made. She was reclaiming her life, her space, and even these ordinary moments carried significance. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice steady but gentle. "I thought we could start with something simple today. No business, no documents, no past histories, just breakfast." Daniel smiled, a warmth blooming in his chest. "I'd like that." Grace poured coffee into cups and set them on the table. "Simple is good," she said. "Sometimes the ordinary is where real healing begins." They ate together, talking about light, everyday topics. Books Naomi had been reading, the music she was learning, small anecdotes from Daniel's travels. Laughter floated between them easily, a fragile but real thread connecting their lives after so much tension and uncertainty. After breakfast, Naomi retrieved her violin. "I want to play one more time," she said softly. "For myself mostly. But I want you to hear it too." Daniel listened as the first notes filled the room. The melody was familiar yet transformed, less about memory and recognition now, more about ownership and confidence. Naomi's hands moved with precision, but there was a fluidity that spoke of freedom, of choices finally made by her and her alone. When the last note lingered and faded, Daniel felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. Naomi had grown through struggle, through manipulation, through years of unknowingly being controlled, and now she was claiming her life with strength and clarity. Grace broke the silence. "You've come so far, Naomi. And this is just the start." Naomi set the violin down and turned toward Daniel. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I do know I want to share parts of it with you. If you're willing to keep walking at my pace without rushing or taking over." Daniel nodded firmly, emotion thick in his throat. "I'll follow your pace. Every step. I promise." There was a long silence, filled only with the soft ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the city. It wasn't a tense silence, it was a silence of understanding, trust, and the beginning of a real bond. Later that afternoon they stepped outside. Naomi walked between Daniel and Grace, the three of them moving slowly down the street, each step deliberate and unhurried. The city around them continued its usual rhythm, oblivious to the healing, the reconciliation, and the fragile, powerful trust being built in these small moments. As they paused to watch children playing in a nearby park, Daniel reflected quietly. The orchestrator had been confronted. The past had been revealed. Naomi had reclaimed her autonomy. And through it all, they had survived not because of luck, but because of honesty, patience, and respect for one another. Naomi turned to Daniel, a soft smile on her lips. "I think I can finally say, I'm glad you're here." Daniel felt his chest tighten with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and deep, cautious joy. "I'm glad too," he said. "More than I can say." Grace squeezed his shoulder gently, smiling. "This is what we've been working for. Not perfection. Not control. Just real connection." Naomi lifted her violin case, and together they walked toward a future undefined but filled with possibility. The past had shaped them, yes, but it no longer controlled them. Each step forward was theirs to claim, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt a profound sense of hope. The world outside the city streets went on, unaware. But inside their lives, a quiet, enduring triumph had taken root. A story of resilience, truth, and the slow, careful reclamation of a life that had once been carefully manipulated. And as Naomi began to hum the familiar melody she had once feared losing, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The music, like their lives, now belonged to her.